Jim Harbaugh and Pete Carroll are each maniacally competitive football coaches who share similar philosophies about the sport at their core, and they have never been able to escape one another. Let's take it back and start during Harbaugh's playing days. After a decorated collegiate career at Michigan, he went to the Bears in the first round of the 1987 draft. He'd go on to have a nice career, earning the moniker Captain Comeback along the way. And one of his very first comebacks happened to occur in 1991 with the Jets in town, his first game against a defense coordinated by Pete Carroll. Down 7 on the final play of regulation, Harbaugh connected with Neil Anderson to send the game to OT before sneaking in from a yard out for the win. Harbaugh ripped Carroll's heart out in the waning minutes a few years later, too, the former now in Indy, the latter running the 49ers defense. And in 1997, we even got a year of him in the same division after Bob Kraft hired Carroll as head coach in New England, where Carroll got a measure of revenge with the Pats sweeping their 2 games against Harbaugh's Colts. A few years later, Carroll was coaching in college at USC, where he quickly turned them into a national powerhouse, while Harbaugh was getting into coaching himself after wrapping up his playing career. His first head gig came in San Diego, where in 2006, he actually tried recruiting Carroll's son, Nate. He chose USC. By 2007, these long-lost loves were reunited in the Pac-10 when Stanford hired Harbaugh to turn around a 1-11 program. And the jabs came not long after, with Harbaugh claiming that March that the upcoming season would be the final one for Carroll in Southern California. Carroll didn't take too kindly to that. Their first meeting featured Harbaugh leading his woeful team that had lost 16 of their previous 18 games into the Coliseum against the mighty Trojans, who were ranked number 2 in the country and had won their previous 35 home games. USC was favored by over 40 points, but they were holding on for dear life in the final minutes with a 6-point lead. Harbaugh's knack for late-game heroics didn't disappear after trading a helmet, jersey, and cleats for a Sharpie, khakis, and, well, cleats. On their last gasp drive, Stanford faced a 4th and 20 before a young wide receiver by the name of Richard Sherman miraculously kept their hopes alive. This last-minute 4th and goal touchdown punctuated one of the greatest upsets in the history of college football and put the Harbaugh-Carroll rivalry squarely on the map. The next year, USC was able to flex their muscles in Stanford, and a fourth-quarter surge propelled them to a blowout 22-point win over Harbaugh's Cardinal. But enough with the appetizers. The stage is now set for their final Pac-10 showdown in 2009, and the sweet aroma of beef that would smother the Los Angeles Coliseum at the end. By now, Harbaugh had turned around Stanford's fortunes, and, now armed with a star quarterback, they absolutely clobbered USC. Late in the game, after it was totally out of hand, a Stanford touchdown put him up 48-21, but Harbaugh really wanted that 50 and went for 2. He didn't get it, but boy did that piss off Pete. After the game, as they approached each other at midfield to shake hands, Harbaugh delighted in silencing USC and their fans, and Carroll was still steaming from that 2-point attempt, so he had a little something to say to Harbaugh. What's your deal? The utterance of those 3 little words was a magical moment for fans of football, or just pettiness. At the end of that season, with sanctions headed USC's way due to NCAA violations under Carroll's watch, Pete just so happened to decide that that was the right point in time to jump back to the NFL, reaching a deal with the Seattle Seahawks. 1 year and a BCS Bowl win later, in January 2011, Harbaugh was the hottest coaching commodity out there, with teams falling over themselves to try and land him. Dolphins owner and fellow Wolverine Stephen Ross, one of the wealthiest in a club of stupidly wealthy people, was basically offering Harbaugh a blank check to come to Miami. And he still had a head coach in place. But the Dolphins didn't face Carroll's Seahawks twice per year. The 49ers did, and that really mattered to Harbaugh, who went out of his way to tell CEO Jed York that he was ready to beat Carroll again. So he jumped to the NFL but stayed in the Bay, joining old Pete in the NFC West for a biannual renewal of acquaintances, and, of course, more beef. As luck would have it, Harbaugh didn't have to wait long for his chance, beating Carroll in his debut as an NFL coach before knocking Seattle out of playoff contention on Christmas Eve. And yet, outside of a couple very closely scrutinized post-game handshakes, 2011 was uneventful by their standards. But everything changed in 2012. The team's first matchup of the year occurred on a Thursday night in Week 7. 4 days earlier, Seattle had announced to the world that they were for real when they knocked off the Patriots in rookie quarterback Russell Wilson's coming out party. In a common theme between these two squads, it was a 60-minute defensive struggle, and the Niners held on for the win. Eventually, a rumor started to percolate that after this game, Harbaugh had driven by Seattle's team bus as they were departing Candlestick Park and proceeded to honk and wave and troll Carroll and the Seahawks, an accusation that Harbaugh vehemently denied. The next day, even though he just won their game, Harbaugh waged an assault against the way Carroll coached his secondary, threatening to take it up with the league office. Carroll made sure to point out just how outrageous he found that. Fast forward 9 weeks to December 23rd, which also just so happened to be Harbaugh's 49th birthday. The Niners hit the Pacific Northwest to take on the Seahawks in a cold, wet, primetime game with huge NFC West implications. Let's give this game a bit of a backdrop. The Seahawks had just clinched their first winning season in a half-decade, were firing on all cylinders, and had just become the first team since Truman was in office to drop 50 points in back-to-back games. But what's funny is how they managed to reach that mark the previous week in a game up in Canada. The man furious with Harbaugh for needlessly going for two to hit 50 points, dialed up this fake punt in the fourth quarter with a 30-point lead and on the doorstep of, wait for it, 50 points. If that's not the pot calling the kettle black, then we just need to wipe that idiom from the face of the planet. Meanwhile, the Niners limped into this one, coming off an emotionally draining game in Foxborough in which they played over 90 defensive snaps and saw the heartbeat of their team tear his triceps. So this would be his first missed game in over a decade, just as the young upstart Seahawks were nipping at the Niners' heels for NFC West supremacy. And Seattle took advantage, setting the tone for the evening on just their second offensive play.
Justin Smith out of the lineup, and the Seahawks go right after his replacement, Ricky Jean-Francois, and they stick it in from there.
Yeah, after that alleged disrespect from the parking lot in October, the Seahawks were kind of foaming at the mouth for this one. Now, there was nothing physically Carroll's team could do to Harbaugh, even if cornerback Brandon Browner really wanted to. But they could sure as hell smack around his team, and for 60 minutes, they physically manhandled the Niners. And hell yeah, Carroll and the Hawks enjoyed rubbing it in Harbaugh's face, especially on his birthday. The 2013 offseason arrived a bit later, but this beef takes no offseason. The Seahawks, who'd been having a host of players getting popped for PEDs, were ripe for a June tongue lashing from Harbaugh, who stressed being above reproach while intimating that Seattle's success was due to cheating. As you could imagine, Carroll wasn't too fond of Harbaugh commenting about his team. Heading into that 2013 season, the rivalry was white hot, and after splitting with each other in the regular season, it all came to a head in a battle royale of an NFC Championship game up in Seattle. After Harbaugh's former player Richard Sherman sealed the game at the end, he lit into his old college coach on national TV.
Well, I'm the best corner in the game. When you try me with a sorry receiver like Crabtree, that's the result you're gonna get.
The next year was a mess in San Francisco. Harbaugh was being pushed out the door by ego-driven Niner management all season, and upon its conclusion, the two sides mutually parted ways. Harbaugh returned to his alma mater to coach, but even then, the sweet smell of this beef never ventures too far. In the third round of the 2017 NFL Draft, Carroll actually picked a couple players Harbaugh had coached in Ann Arbor. Let's go to the tape to see if there are any beef remnants when that was mentioned.
Coach Harbaugh does a great job.
Yeah, what's your deal, man?
Carroll and Harbaugh may never square off against one another again, and this would be a shame for so many reasons. The excellent football each coach brings out of his team, the drama, the antics, the pure tension in the air. But even if we've seen the final handshake between these two men, we'll always have the memories of their long-lasting, grade A beef. Oh boy, that was some fun coach beef. Regardless of whether or not you liked it, don't forget to like and subscribe. Otherwise, you run the risk of my feelings getting hurt.